Conference theme, the sort of concept or the theme of From Surviving to Thriving, a New Paradigm for Social Work and Human Services in Rural Areas. We had about a year ago, after it was clear that we were interested in making a pitch to the Rural Conference Institute that for us holding it here in El Paso, we'd have a little contest and see what theme might be the best fitting for our context, and I won that contest. And so I'm going to say a few things about what I was looking at when we decided that we were going to talk about From Surviving to Thriving. And I think it has a lot to do with our keynote plenary address this morning, which is about resilience, because I think resilience is something that's alive and well in the rural part of America, yet this is a part of the country that's deeply misunderstood and stereotyped. Let me say first that rurality and ruralness in the United States is viewed as a deficit in this country. Rural people are stereotyped. There's all kinds of caricature words and nasty and racist words used to describe them. You know what those words are, I don't need to repeat them. Rural people are seen through stereotypes, and rurality is seen as not really central to the vigor and the importance of the history or the future of the United States. In contrast to that being just a matter of individual pathology of the people who live in the country, I would like to contest that this is a structural issue having to do with the way that the American economy has been organized over the last 300 years. First, rurality has to be defined through the eyes of slavery, because slavery was the engine by which the colony of the United States created its wealth. But with emancipation and the Civil War, slavery was replaced by the neo-colonial model. And that is, instead of having slave people, we had basically people who were, for all practical purposes, indentured servants to the agricultural system, and who lived at the periphery. So think about center and periphery model that you understood as a graduate student in social policy or a undergraduate student. Center periphery is the distinction between the power centers in the United States and elsewhere, and the peripheral parts of the country that are marginalized and excluded from the decision-making, the power, and the money that actually runs the country. In the border region, the power centers are Austin, in the case of Texas, Chihuahua in the context of our immediate sister state to the south, Washington, D.C., and New York and Boston for the United States, and Ciudad Mexico, the Distrito Federal. That's where the decisions that run rural America are made. They're not made by rural congressmen, they're not made by rural people, they're not made by farmers, they're not made by farm workers, they're not made by humble people who earn an honest living in this country, working in the country and in small cities and exurbs. This is also a context of marginality. Rural people are at the margins of the society in the way in which they're viewed. They're excluded from power. Here in the border, we don't make decisions about the border. We have puppet governments and city governments along the line from the 1,000 miles that goes from San Diego to Brownsville, made up with middlemen minorities who cater to the elites in Austin and some of the local elites in El Paso. But we ourselves are not empowered by being the real decision makers. The decisions that affect this part of the country are made at the periphery. And also we're intersectional because we're minority, the border is minority. We are also poor. This is one of the poorest counties in the United States. It's certainly one of the poorest major cities in the United States. And rural America, as we saw in our keynote from Michael the other day, is desperately far behind the United States in terms of its economic progress. Now, from whence does all this come? First, it goes back to the industrialization of agriculture. So with the invention of the steam engine, the cotton gin, and all of the other machines that basically worked very efficiently, but they all did put people out of work. And now with laser technology and ungrading and leveling lands, with the massification of industrial agriculture that demands higher and higher magnitudes and economies of scale, we see that agriculture has long since moved from farms owned by family operators, owner-operators, to people who own the own means of production, as Marx called it, people who have been disenfranchised, who had to sell out, as my grandfathers both did in Kansas and Iowa, respectively, to larger scale farms where only the kinds of economies of scale that could exist produced soybeans and cotton and so on a massive scale. These are the ways in which people were pushed out of the rural sector. And none of the considerations of humans in the economic model of massification of agriculture was ever considered. The environmental externalities of industrial agriculture were never accounted for. The decimation of the soils, the destruction of forests, the depletion of the water resource, the extraction of petroleum, which is all found in rural areas, the exploitation of water, and the mining industry that, with its tailings and its waste, most recently a spill in Colorado, which I saw the effects of on the San Juan River in southern Utah, that dumped mining waste into a river that could not conceivably be recovered. None of that was accounted for in modern economics. It's an unaccounted for cost. And none of this pollution, intoxication, and destruction of the watershed, nor the erosion, which is permanent, or the health effects of the workers, be they industrial workers in mines or agricultural workers, the most dangerous job in the United States. It's even more dangerous to be a farm worker and an agricultural worker than it is to be a police officer or a fireman. These things were never accounted for. So the economics which drive a rural America are not human economics. They're economics that derive profit at major centers far distant from the people who actually live in and work in the rural environment, such as the Four Corners of New Mexico, Utah, Arizona, and Colorado, an indigenous area that's occupied by people who were displaced there, not Navajo, that's their original home country, but other people, such as those who were moved to Oklahoma and so on, who were simply moved out. The Delta country of the South near New Orleans and the reservations and the Black Belt area of deep soils from northern Georgia all the way out to Nacogdoches, Texas, farmers who are essentially sharecroppers. In all of this, we privilege urban people, educated people, elites, people who have high education, none of which has been exported or brought into the rural environment, and we allow these elites to determine. So it's no surprise to me when I look at the campaign rhetoric in this year that this has left us with about 32 to 40% of the electorate who's deeply disenfranchised, alienated, fearful, angry, xenophobic, and racist about how they understand the world. It has raised the maw of Trumpism. Its alienation is a rational and predictable effect of disenfranchisement for rural people, for white people in industrial areas. It's completely predictable. If we exclude so many people from decision making and push them at the margin, why are we surprised that a guy like that, the lowest of the low in the history of American politics, can get away with the kinds of things he said about people on the border, about what he said about Muslims and Mexican nationals? So there are a couple of bright spots because we're moving from surviving to thriving. And what's happening that might change the landscape. For one, there's going to be a massive defeat of right-wing, xenophobic, racist ideology in the coming election. That party that was the incubus of all of this is going to have to take second thoughts and say, if we're going to really be a party of the people, we're going to have to reposition ourselves to think about the people that our party has disenfranchised. But at the same time, we're seeing new technologies, such as we saw in a session yesterday, that are having a profound effect on rural America. In Wyoming, a state where I lived and was the chair of the Department of Social Work, we're seeing wind farms replace coal. We see high-value crops replacing industrial agriculture. The demand for organic food, for whole food, for craft food by those elites in the city are now demanding that they don't get industrialized beef and industrialized genetically modified organisms on their table. They're asking for quality. This is going to put control back into the hands of farmers on a small scale, organic farms that are operated at scales 1/10 of those of these mega farms. We're seeing the exacerbation of high technology, the move out of the cities, because you don't have to be massed in cities like Detroit and the Rust Belt to do your operations on an economy of scale. They can be out anywhere. You can do your job anywhere. We're seeing the effect of the ubiquity of the web throughout rural America, access to high technology, distance education where you can get a PhD in anywhere, USA, where you can learn to do a new skill anywhere. We're seeing our medical system transformed by telemedicine, so I don't have to transport myself to Austin or to San Antonio to get a decent medical opinion. All of this is going to change the economics of the rural environment. So I foresee a reversal of urbanization and the centralization of economies that has been a premise of jungle capitalism to move into a modern post-capitalist environment in which we see that pathology is not the way we define our rural segment, but we begin to see this as a strength. This is a resource. The rural environment of the United States and the rural people of the United States are the future. Thank you.
Muy buenos días. Good morning. I hope I'm tall enough. Anyways, I'm going to introduce our next presenter. It is not only a pleasure, but it is an honor to introduce Dr. Rosalinda Mercado Garza. And I'm going to read, so I won't skip any words of value. Rosalinda arrived in the U.S. from Mexico as an infant in 1974, being considered an immigrant living life in hiding for fear of being taken back to Mexico. Before addressing her immigration status, domestic challenges arose in her home. Consequently, a decision was made to start anew. In January of '91, at the age of 17, Rosalinda moved to Sunny Glen Children's Home. She refocused her life and rebuilt her academic and emotional success. Rosalinda attended Christian University, Bachelor's of Science, Interdisciplinary Studies in December of '96, Texas A&M University, Masters of Education, Educational Administration, May of '99, Texas A&M University, Doctoral of Philosophy, Curriculum and Instruction, December of 2008. Rosalinda has the capacity for Spanish and bilingual, Spanish and bilingual teacher, 8 years of classroom experience, assistant principal and superintendent, 9 years of administrative experience, Chief Executive Officer, eColors in Education, a national not-for-profit organization offering human performance and leadership, coaching to kindergarten through 12th grade and university students, educators, and leaders since 2013. Additionally, Rosalinda wrote her dissertation on her life story, entitled From Being Considered at Risk to Becoming Resilient, an autoethnography of abuse and poverty. Rosalinda recently contributed a chapter of the book published with professors from University of North Carolina at Charlotte. Her chapter is entitled From Being Considered at Risk to Becoming Resilient, an autoethnography of an immigrant child finding her voice in becoming a U.S. citizen. Please help me to welcome Dr. Rosalinda.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to stand over here because of a part of an exercise that I'll be doing with you today, but I also have some slides to share with you. I am Rosalinda Mercado Garza, and I am so grateful for Dr. Moya for inviting me to be here today, and I'm thankful for Dr. Lusk and the work that he shared, because hopefully in the presentation that you will see, you will understand why resilience became that framework that I utilized in my research. Secondly, I wanted to just clarify that autoethnography, for those of you that do qualitative research, is in that umbrella. And autoethnography did not happen to be the original research that I was planning to do. So when I share with you the rest of the slides that are coming through, I'll embed how that happened and how that unfolded to be the research that I ended up doing. So I'm grateful to be here at the National Institute Conference. It's almost as old as me. It's 41, but I'm 43. That's important to note in my timeline. And the other part of this, thank you, Dr. Lusk, for the topic of surviving to thriving, because it wasn't until my later years that I understood how important those words were to the rhetoric of resilience. Oh, by the way, I just wanted to add that I really do appreciate the artwork by Hal Marcus and the theme of La Familia. But the focus today is what I'm going to be sharing with you in the family aspect is going to be the youth that are involved in family, because that's where my story happened to unfold during my adolescence. But let me define something for you. And this is the definition of resilience that has most recently come out. And it was